Hello and welcome to Cozy Mystery Corner, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today we delve into the enigmatic world of Sherlock Holmes with a tale of intrigue blanketed in winter's chill. Sherlock Holmes and the Snow-Covered Murder. Settle in, dear listeners, as I, Dr. John Watson, recount this peculiar case from my notes, just as it unfolded in the frosty December of 1887. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Visitor. It was a night such as London has rarely seen, even in the annals of her capricious winters. The snow had begun at dusk, not in the timid flurries that tease the pavements and vanish by morning, but in a relentless, purposeful descent, as though the heavens themselves had resolved to bury the city's sins beneath a pristine shroud. By 9 o'clock the streets were already knee-deep in places. Omnibuses lay abandoned like stranded whales, and the few pedestrians who braved the tempest moved with the hunched determination of Arctic explorers. I, Dr. John H. Watson, late of the Army Medical Department and now companion to the world's only consulting detective, had just completed a trying day at St. Bartholomew's Hospital. My boots were caked with half-frozen slush, my ulster heavy with damp, and my thoughts fixed upon the prospect of a blazing fire and a hot whiskey toddy. The 17 steps that lead to our lodgings have become as familiar to me as the beat of my own pulse. I mounted them with the weary satisfaction of a man returning to sanctuary. The sitting-room door stood ajar, and from within issued the languorous strains of Sarasat's Zigeunerweisen, drawn forth by Sherlock Holmes's violin with that peculiar intensity which told me his mind was elsewhere, adrift in some chemical or criminal labyrinth known only to himself. "Ah, Watson," he remarked without turning, the bow never faltering. "You are precisely 7 minutes later than your usual Thursday schedule. The snow has delayed the underground, I presume, and you have walked from Regent Circus rather than take another cab. The left cuff of your coat bears the distinctive ochre mud of the construction works at Portland Place. Ergo, you crossed the road to avoid a fallen hoarding. And you have attended a patient in the final stages of phthisis. The faint odor of iodoform clings to your waistcoat." I laughed, doffing my hat and coat. "Holmes, your deductions grow more outrageous by the day. The mud is plain London slush, and as for the iodoform, it is unmistakable to a nose trained by years of dissecting room work," he interrupted, lowering the violin at last. "But come, warm yourself. Mrs. Hudson has left a pot of coffee. I took the liberty of adding a dash of brandy. You look half perished." I had scarcely settled into my armchair when a commotion erupted below. Mrs. Hudson's voice, usually the epitome of placid good humor, rose in sharp protest. "No, madam, you cannot simply, oh, very well, but mind the carpet." Heavy footsteps pounded the stairs, accompanied by the rustle of silk and the unmistakable thump of a walking stick striking each tread. The door was flung open with such violence that the draught sent the flames leaping in the grate. The woman who entered was perhaps 45, though grief had etched deeper lines than years. Her gown was black bombazine of the finest quality, its jet beads glittering like frost. A heavy sable cloak hung from her shoulders, and in her gloved hands she clutched a reticule as though it were a talisman. Snowflakes clung to her lashes and melted in tiny rivulets down her cheeks, whether tears or precipitation I could not tell. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Her voice trembled, yet beneath the tremor lay the cultivated timbre of Mayfair drawing-rooms. "They told me at Scotland Yard that if any man could solve an impossibility, it was you. I beg you, help me." Holmes regarded her with that calm, detached scrutiny which I have seen reduce hardened criminals to stammering confession. "Pray compose yourself, madam. Dr. Watson is a medical man and discreet. You may speak freely. Begin at the beginning, and omit no detail, however trivial it may seem." She drew a shuddering breath. My name is Eleanor Hargrove, Lady Hargrove. My husband, Sir Reginald Hargrove of Hargrove and Sons, importers of Eastern commodities, was murdered this morning. Murdered, Mr. Holmes, in a room locked from the inside with every window latched and bolted, and yet—" her voice cracked. "Yet his body lay beneath a perfect blanket of snow, as though he had been slain in the open air and carried thence by some phantom agency." I felt the old familiar thrill course through me, the thrill of the chase, the promise of the impossible. Holmes, however, merely steepled his long fingers and leaned forward, the firelight flickering in his gray eyes. "Continue," he said softly. Lady Hargrove dabbed at her eyes. "Sir Reginald was alive at 10:30 last night. I myself saw him enter his study after supper. He had correspondence to attend to, he said. The room is on the ground floor overlooking the rear garden. The snow was already deep. No footprints marred the lawn when the gardener checked at 11. At 7 this morning, the butler, Grimshaw, brought Sir Reginald's coffee as usual. The door was locked. He knocked, received no answer, and fetched the duplicate key. When he opened the door, she pressed the handkerchief to her lips. The sight unmanned him. My husband lay on his back before the fire, a dagger protruding from his heart, and over him a mound of snow fully 6 inches deep, still fresh and undisturbed. The windows were fastened. The only door had been bolted from within. The police arrived within the hour. Inspector Lestrade himself examined the room and pronounced it impenetrable. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The dagger. Describe it." "An Indian katar, a gift from the Maharaja of Jaipur. The blade is triangular, the hilt encrusted with rubies. It hung above the mantel for years. And the snow, its texture. Fine, powdery like the driven snow outside, yet the room was warm. The fire had burned low but not out. The snow was melting rapidly, soaking the carpet." Holmes rose with the fluid grace of a panther. "Watson, my coat and scarf. Madam, we shall accompany you to the house at once. Mrs. Hudson, hot bricks for the cab, if you please." As we descended the stairs, Holmes murmured, "Note the lady's boots, Watson. Russian leather, Parisian make, yet the soles are worn unevenly on the outer edge. She favors her left foot, an old riding injury, perhaps. And the reticule, Moroccan leather, but the clasp is English silver. Curious anomalies for a woman in mourning." The journey to Mayfair was a study in contrasts. The cozy fug of the cab's interior warmed by the bricks at our feet against the icy desolation without. Lady Hargrove sat opposite us, her face a pale oval in the darkness. Holmes gazed out at the passing wilderness of white, his profile sharp as a cameo. "Tell me, Lady Hargrove," he said suddenly, "was your husband in the habit of receiving visitors late at night?" "Never. He was most particular about his privacy." "And the servants? How many sleep in the house?" "Grimshaw the butler, Mrs. Langley the cook, and 2 maids. The footman and gardener lodge above the stables." Holmes nodded. "And the dagger? Had it been moved from its place above the mantel recently?" "I cannot say. Sir Reginald dusted his curios himself. He was proud of them." We alighted into a world transformed. The Hargrove residence was a Palladian palace of Portland stone, its columns looming like sentinels through the storm. Lanterns swung from the hands of silent servants casting pools of gold upon the snow. No footprints marred the sweep of the steps save those we now made. Grimshaw, the butler, a tall, cadaverous man with the rigid bearing of an old soldier, met us in the hall. His face was the color of putty. "Mr. Holmes, sir, thank heaven you've come. The police have trampled everything, but the room remains as it was." "Excellent," Holmes replied. "Lead on." The study was a chamber of opulent gloom. Dark paneling absorbed the lamplight. A turkey carpet of crimson and gold muffled our footsteps. The air held a faint, acrid tang, blood, smoke, and something else, something crystalline and cold. Before the hearth lay the chalk outline of a man, arms outstretched. Water stains radiated from it like the petals of some macabre flower. Above the mantel, an empty space marked where the dagger had hung. Visual, slow pan across the room, locked windows with frost ferns on the panes. A desk cluttered with ledgers, an ivory elephant, a brass telescope, the fire reduced to embers. Holmes knelt beside the outline, his magnifying glass glinting. "Observe, Watson." The snow was heaped with deliberate care, thicker over the torso, thinner at the extremities. Not the work of wind or chance. He scraped a fingernail across the carpet and examined the residue. Crystals, hexagonal, yet not ice. Curious, I bent to examine the wound's position. The blade entered between the fourth and fifth ribs, angled upward. Death would have been instantaneous. The force suggests a strong arm, yet the precision is almost surgical. Lady Hargrove stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to her throat. The police believe it impossible. They speak of ghosts, of secret passages. Secret passages are the last refuge of the unimaginative constable, Holmes interrupted. He rose, his eyes sweeping the room. Mark the window latches, recently oiled yet no scratches from a jimmy. The bolt on the door, drawn from within, the key still in the lock. And the snow. He crossed to the hearth and peered up the chimney. Soot undisturbed, no entrance there. Visual, Holmes's silhouette against the dying fire. His hand traces the mantel, pauses at the empty dagger brackets. Close up on a faint smudge of white powder on the marble. A sudden gust rattled the windows, and for an instant the room seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the quarter hour. Holmes turned to Lady Hargrove. "Madam, you mentioned enemies. Your husband's business, rivals perhaps, debts?" She hesitated. "There was friction with Mr. Elias Thorne, of Thorne and Company, a disputed contract for saffron from Kashmir, and Sir Reginald had been receiving anonymous letters, threats, I believe. Produce them. I burned them. He insisted." Holmes's eyebrow arched. "A pity. Watson, note the faint scent. Jasmine, yet overlaid with something sharper. Camphor? No. Boracic acid, perhaps." Grimshaw cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, sir, but the master's appointment book. There's an entry for last night. E.H. 10:30. I thought it might be Mr. Edmund Hale, the artist next door. He and Sir Reginald were on friendly terms." Holmes's eyes flashed. "Edmund Hale, the portrait painter?" "The same." Lady Hargrove's hand flew to her locket, a gold oval that hung at her throat. For the briefest instant, her fingers trembled. Holmes saw it too. His smile was thin as a scalpel. "We shall speak with Mr. Hale presently, but first—" He strode to the door, pausing on the threshold. "Grimshaw, you discovered the body. You have the key?" "Yes, sir. Always kept in the butler's pantry." "And you were alone when you entered?" The butler's Adam's apple bobbed. "Quite alone, sir." Holmes nodded. "Thank you. Watson, Lady Hargrove, let us repair to the drawing room. I require tea, strong and hot, and a complete list of every soul who entered this house yesterday." As we settled before a fresh blaze, Holmes murmured, "The game is afoot, Watson. A locked room, a dagger from the wall, a blanket of snow in a warm chamber, and a locket that tells a tale its wearer would prefer untold. Before this night is out, we shall know whether Sir Reginald Hargrove was murdered by a rival, a phantom, or—" His gaze flicked to Lady Hargrove's pale face. "By love grown cold as the grave." Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and inexorable, covering the tracks of men and secrets alike. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. I awoke at 221B to find Holmes already gone, leaving only a note pinned beneath the Persian slipper. Meet me at the scene. Bring cocoa. Strong. S.H. By the time my hansom deposited me in Mayfair, the hour was barely 8, yet the great house hummed with subdued activity. Constables moved like blue ghosts. A photographer's magnesium flash lit the hall in sudden, blinding bursts. Lestrade greeted me with his usual mixture of relief and resentment. "Your friend's been here since 6, Doctor. Says the yard trampled half the evidence. I say he's welcome to it. This one's beyond us." Holmes did not look up. Beyond the official mind, perhaps. "Watson, observe." He indicated the water stains. The snow melted uniformly, yet the carpet beneath the torso is drier than the extremities. Ergo, the bulk was heaped after death, not during a struggle. I knelt, inhaling the faint, lingering scent, jasmine undercut by something crystalline. "Borax," I ventured, recalling Holmes's remark the previous night. "Possibly, or ground alum, we shall test." He produced a small envelope and scraped residue from the rug. Note also the absence of footprints. The constable's boots left prints in the hall, yet here, nothing. The snow was placed, not walked through. Lestrade snorted. Placed by whom? The door was bolted inside, key in the lock, windows barred, chimney too narrow for a cat. Holmes rose fluidly. Yet a crime occurred. Sir Reginald entered at 10:30, alone. The butler locked the door at his master's request, standard practice when Sir Reginald worked late. At 10:45, the housemaid passed with hot water. She heard voices, 2 male, 1 heated. At 11 the gardener saw a light in the study window, then darkness. At 7 a.m., discovery. He tapped the desk. Appointment book, E.H., 10:30. Edmund Hale, the neighbor. Curious that Lady Hargrove omitted this. A lover's token, I suggested. Or a bookmark. Hale paints miniatures. Violets are his signature. Holmes sniffed the flower. Crushed 2 days ago, matches the postmark on an envelope in the wastepaper basket. He retrieved a torn corner. Cannot continue thus. Meet me or face ruin. E. Lestrade scratched his head. Hale's studio abuts the garden wall, but the snow is the key. Holmes crossed to the hearth. Above the mantel, the empty dagger brackets gaped like a missing tooth. He ran a finger along the marble. A faint smear, white, waxy. Tallow? No. Stearic acid. Candle grease. The dagger was removed before the murder, not during. I examined the wound's chalk outline. Thrust upward, right-handed assailant taller than the victim. Sir Reginald was 5'10". The angle suggests 6 foot or more. Excellent, Watson. Hale is 6'1". Holmes moved to the windows. Note the frost patterns. Undisturbed. Yet here, he indicated a minute scratch on the sill. A thread, silk, crimson. From a dressing gown cord, perhaps. Grimshaw set down coffee. His hands shook. Coffee slopped into the saucer. "Beg pardon, sir. Her ladyship is indisposed. Asks that you question the staff in the servants' hall." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "You locked the study door at 10:30, Grimshaw. Did Sir Reginald seem agitated?" "Agitated, sir? No, preoccupied. Said he expected a visitor but wished no disturbance." The butler's gaze flicked to the chalk outline. "I never dreamed—" We adjourned to the servants' hall, a cavernous basement room smelling of bacon and damp stone. Mrs. Langley, the cook, round and flustered, confirmed the housemaid's story. The maid, Annie, wept into her apron. "I heard the master shout, 'You'll not ruin me.' Then a thud. I thought he'd dropped a book." Holmes produced the crimson thread. "Recognize this?" Annie paled. "It's from Mr. Hale's smoking jacket. Silk, Turkish. He visited last week, left it on the hall stand." Lestrade pounced. Motive and opportunity. Hale climbs the garden wall, enters by some devilry. By the door, Holmes corrected. Sir Reginald admitted him. The bolt was drawn after entry, to ensure privacy. The murder occurred, the dagger returned to its place, or so the killer wished us to believe. But the snow... He turned to the gardener, a grizzled Scot. You checked the lawn at 11. Any disturbance? None, sir. Smooth as a billiard table. Holmes thanked them and led me back upstairs. In the study, he closed the door, drew the bolt. Reenactment, Watson. You are Sir Reginald. He handed me a paper knife. I am Hale. We argue. Here. He positioned me before the fire. You turn away in fury. I strike. The knife hovered at my ribs. Then what? The snow, I said. How to introduce it without tracks? Holmes's smile was wolfish. Precisely, the answer lies above. He pointed to the ceiling rose, a plaster medallion surrounding the gasolier. A trap? A vent? He fetched a chair, stood upon it, and probed the ornate foliage. A click. A small panel slid aside, revealing a narrow shaft. The attic clothesline chute, disused since the laundry moved to the basement. A child might descend, but not a man. Yet a container. He produced a silk handkerchief, knotted it to the paper knife, and lowered it. Measure the drop. 12 feet. A bag of snow, lowered on a cord, released by a timed mechanism or an accomplice above. The cord withdrawn. The panel closed. No footprints. Lestrade whistled. But the attic door was locked. Key inside. Keys can be duplicated, or the panel operated from this side. Holmes tapped the gasolier pipe. Note the fresh solder, recent repair, a pulley concealed within. As we prepared to leave, Lady Hargrove appeared in the doorway, cloaked for travel. Mr. Holmes, the inquest is tomorrow. Must I? Attend, madam, and bring Mr. Hale's portrait of you, the one with the violet background. It may prove illuminating. Holmes clapped me on the shoulder. Come, Watson. Cocoa at Baker Street, then the attic. The snow may have melted, but the mechanism remains, and mechanisms, unlike men, cannot lie. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Snow. Holmes dispatched me at first light with a terse note. Thorne and Comer, Wapping. Ask after saffron shipments in Hargrove's last consignment. Observe faces, not words. S.H. I left him at 221B, crouched over a crucible wherein the study's white residue hissed and turned pale violet. His muttered borax confirmed followed me down the stairs. The Black Anchor was a haunt of spice merchants and lightermen. I ordered a gill of rum to thaw my fingers and fell into conversation with a grizzled supercargo named Jakes. He had shipped with Hargrove for 20 years. Sir Reginald, God rest him, were a hard man but fair, Jakes rasped. Paid prompt, unlike some. Mind, he crossed Elias Thorne over a cargo of Kashmiri saffron. Finest filaments worth their weight in gold. Thorne swore he'd ruin Hargrove. Said it loud here 3 nights ago. I pressed for details. Thorne's warehouse lay 2 streets over. A cavernous brick pile guarded by mastiffs. Jakes lowered his voice. Thorne were at the auction rooms in Mincing Lane all night the murder happened. Dozens saw him. But his clerk, young Pritchard, were seen near Mayfair after dark. Funny that. Meanwhile, Holmes pursued a parallel thread. He had descended upon the Hargrove ledgers with the zeal of a terrier. By the time I returned, chilled to the marrow, he had spread invoices across our sitting-room table like a battle map. Watson, behold, he tapped a column. Hargrove imported 3 tons of Himalayan rock salt, coarse crystals ground fine for curing. The manifest matches the study residue, borax and sodium chloride in equal parts, a mock snow stable at room temperature for hours. He held up a glass vial. The powder inside glittered like diamond dust. Purchased 6 weeks ago, delivered to the attic storeroom. The very chute we discovered. I poured tea with numb fingers. Thorne's motive? Revenge and profit. Hargrove underbid him by 30%. Thorne's firm teetered on bankruptcy. Holmes produced a crumpled telegram. Sent yesterday, intercepted at the post office. Snow will fall tonight. Loom. T. Sent to the Hargrove residence, but never delivered. Grimshaw intercepted it. Claims he burned it on Sir Reginald's orders. A red herring glimmered. We hastened to a apothecary in Cheapside, Messrs. Allen and Hanbury, where Hargrove had purchased the borax. The clerk, a nervous youth, recalled a woman in a sable cloak buying a similar quantity the same week. Paid in gold sovereigns, muffled voice, left in a private brougham. The description matched Lady Hargrove. Holmes dismissed the lead with a flick of his wrist. Planted. The cloak was hired from a theatrical costumer in Drury Lane. Receipt in Thorne's name. Paid by his clerk, Pritchard. He produced the slip, still smelling of grease paint. The trail led to Thorne's warehouse. We arrived at dusk, the snow now ankle-deep in the alleys. The building loomed, its windows blind with frost. A single lamp burned within. Thorne received us in a counting-house reeking of turmeric and fear. He was a bear of a man, scar livid against his florid skin. Holmes, come to gloat? He poured brandy with a steady hand. I was at Mincing Lane till 2 a.m. 50 witnesses. My clerk, Pritchard, drunk at the Anchor till closing. Ask Jakes. Holmes's gaze swept the room. Your ledgers show a withdrawal of £500, gold sovereigns 3 days ago. The exact sum paid to the costumer. Thorne's smile was wolfish. Business, Mr. Holmes, nothing more. As we left, a shadow detached itself from the crates. Pritchard, thin, furtive, eyes darting. He pressed a folded paper into my gloved hand and melted into the dark. Back at Baker Street, Holmes pored over the note beneath the gas jet. Pritchard fears his master. The attic rendezvous may yield the mechanism's twin. Perhaps the cord, the pulley, the bag itself. He examined the paper's watermark. Hargrove's private stationery, stolen from the study, no doubt. I ventured a theory. Thorne hires Pritchard to stage the snow, kills Hargrove during the 10:30 meeting, withdraws through the chute, leaving the bolt drawn and the key inside, Holmes finished. Plausible, yet flawed. The appointment was with E.H., Edmund Hale. Thorne's initials are E.T. The telegram's T is a blind. A misdirection resolved itself. The crimson thread from the study window, traced to a stage curtain at the costumer's, part of the planted cloak. Thorne's alibi held, but his shadow loomed larger. At 11:30 we slipped out, muffled in ulsters, revolvers heavy in our pockets. The streets were deserted, the city buried in silence. Baker Street to Mayfair was a white wilderness, our footprints the only blemish. We gained the attic via the servant's stair. The door stood ajar, a wedge of candlelight spilling onto the boards. Inside, dust motes danced in the beam. Crates of rock salt loomed like tombstones. Pritchard waited, trembling. I never meant murder, sir. Thorne said only to frighten. Dump the salt, make Hargrove look a fool. I rigged the pulley from the chute, lowered the bag at 11:15, but when I returned for the cord, his voice cracked. Sir Reginald was already dead, stabbed. I fled. Holmes examined the rig. Clever. A weight releases the catch, the bag descends, spills, cord retracts. But the dagger wound preceded the snow by minutes. You are accessory to terror, not murder. Pritchard whimpered. Thorne'll kill me. He will not, Holmes said grimly. Watson, bind his wrists, loosely. We take him to Lestrade at dawn. As we descended, a floorboard creaked behind us. A shadow lunged. Thorne, massive in the gloom, a scarf muffled about his face. His fist caught Holmes on the temple. My friend staggered. I grappled with the brute, revolver skittering across the floor. Grimshaw snarled, "You'll not ruin her!" Before we could react, he hurled himself through the attic window. Glass shattered, a muffled thud below. Holmes knelt by the broken pane. The faithful retainer. He intercepted the telegram, planted the cloak receipt, shadowed us to silence Pritchard. Loyalty or love? The snow continued to fall, erasing Grimshaw's tracks, but not the deeper prints of guilt. Chapter 4. The Widow's Tale. Holmes and I returned to Mayfair under a sky the color of a bruise. Grimshaw's body had been carried to the stables. Lestrade, summoned by whistle, stamped snow from his boots and muttered about suicides and open verdicts. Holmes said nothing, merely pocketed a torn scrap of violet silk caught on the shattered attic sash. Pritchard, wrists loosely bound, was bundled into a police van with instructions to hold him as material witness. Lady Hargrove spoke first. "They say Grimshaw jumped. After 30 years' service." Her voice was steady, yet the handkerchief shredded. "He was devoted to my husband." "Devoted to you, madam," Holmes corrected gently. He took the opposite chair, lean frame coiled like a spring. "Pray recount yesterday from luncheon onward." "Omit nothing," she began. "Luncheon at 1. Solemn, Sir Reginald preoccupied. At 2 he retired to the study with ledgers. At 3 she walked in the garden. The snow had ceased, the lawn pristine. At 4 tea was brought. He refused it. At 6 the maids heard raised voices, male, one Sir Reginald's, the other muffled. At 7 she dressed for dinner alone. He sent word he would work through the night. "And the locket?" Holmes asked softly. She startled. "A keepsake. My brother." "Died in infancy," Holmes finished. "Yet the engraving is recent. Last Michaelmas by the silversmith's mark. Open it, if you please." "Edmund Hale," she whispered. "He painted my portrait last summer. My husband discovered us." Tears spilled, but her gaze did not waver. Reginald threatened to ruin him, cut off his allowance from the Royal Academy. Edmund came last night to plead. I was in the morning room. I heard nothing until the maid screamed at 7. Holmes produced the violet silk scrap. "From Hale's smoking jacket, torn in the attic struggle. Explain." "He helped Grimshaw," she said at last. "Not to kill, to frighten. Reginald had debts, a scandal would finish him. The snow was to be a jest, a warning. But when Grimshaw saw the body..." She buried her face in her hands. I felt the old soldier's pity, yet Holmes's eyes were flint. "The dagger, madam. It was removed days earlier. Your maid saw it missing Tuesday. Who took it?" She shook her head. "I swear I do not know." Holmes rose. "Then let us ask the walls." He led us to the study. The chalk outline had been erased. The carpet rolled back revealed floorboards scrubbed clean. Yet beneath the desk, a single drop of wax, violet-scented. Artist's pigment, ultramarine and rose madder. Hale mixed it for his miniatures. He crossed to the bookshelves, pressed a panel. It swung inward, revealing a narrow space. Inside, a canvas bag, drawstring torn, salt crystals still clinging, and coiled beside it, a length of crimson cord knotted at intervals. Lady Hargrove swayed. "I knew nothing of this." "Yet you walked the garden at 3, Holmes said. Footprints were found, small, heeled, leading to the wall abutting Hale's studio. You passed him the cord, the bag, the dagger. Grimshaw operated the chute from above. Hale waited below to retrieve the mechanism. But Sir Reginald surprised them mid-preparation. Struggle, dagger, death. The snow fell as planned, but now to conceal, not to mock." She sank to the carpet. "Edmund never meant murder. Reginald lunged at him with the paper knife. Edmund defended himself." Holmes's voice cut like ice. Self-defense does not explain the locked room, the bolted door, the snow heaped after death. That was staging. Your staging, madam, to cast suspicion on Thorne. The forged telegram, the costumer's cloak, the apothecary lead, all your misdirection. I stared, aghast. But Grimshaw's leap. Guilt and love, Holmes said. He believed he had failed you. When Pritchard threatened to confess, Grimshaw silenced him permanently had we not intervened. Lady Hargrove looked up, eyes hollow. Arrest me then, but spare Edmund. He is all I have left. Holmes shook his head. The law will decide. Watson, summon Lestrade. As the van rattled away, Holmes murmured, "A widow's tale, Watson, woven of grief, passion, and Himalayan salt. Yet one thread remains." He held up the ruby bead. "This came loose during the struggle. Hale wears its twin in his cravat pin. We have our murderer." The snow had ceased. The city lay hushed, waiting for the next fall of justice. Chapter 5. Hidden Motives. Holmes had vanished at dusk with a curt, "Soho, gambling debts," leaving me to nurse a bruised conscience and a fresh pot of coffee. Grimshaw's suicide, Lady Hargrove's arrest, Pritchard's terrified confession. Yet the ruby bead from the dagger hilt still burned in Holmes's palm like a coal. "Hale is the hand," he had muttered, "but who held the wrist?" I arrived at 10, guided by a note slipped under our door. Baccarat room. Watch the croupier's left cuff. S.H. Vickers was already sweating. "Mr. Vickers," Holmes said softly, dealing cards with practiced ease. "Sir Reginald Hargrove lost 5,000 guineas here last Michaelmas. He paid with a promissory note, due yesterday. Yet he was murdered before settlement. Curious timing." Vickers licked his lips. "He paid, Mr. Holmes. In full. Cash. Gold sovereigns." His eyes darted to a side door. Holmes laid down a natural 9. "Paid by whom?" "By his wife's direction. Lady Hargrove's man brought the money at noon the day of the murder. Said Sir Reginald was indisposed." Vickers mopped his brow. "I thought nothing of it till the news." I felt the pieces shift. Holmes gathered the chips. "And this Porter, your enforcer?" "Name's Doyle, ex-pugilist, collects debts." Vickers's voice dropped. "He was near Mayfair that night, checking on another debtor. Saw a light in Hargrove's study, then darkness. Thought it odd." Holmes rose. "Mr. Doyle, your ring artist's pigment. You visited Mr. Hale's studio recently?" Doyle's scowl deepened. "Delivered a message from the club. Hale owed £50 for paints, charged to Sir Reginald's account, paid yesterday in cash." Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the new threads across the table like a macabre tapestry. The promissory note, forged in Lady Hargrove's hand, witnessed by Grimshaw. The sovereigns drawn from her personal account, not Sir Reginald's. The violet paint on Doyle's ring, ultramarine, the exact shade Hale used for her portrait's background. The motive was not jealousy alone, Holmes said, pipetting the sample. It was ruin. Sir Reginald discovered the affair and the embezzlement. Lady Hargrove had siphoned funds to cover Hale's debts and her own extravagances. Exposure meant prison. Murder became necessity. I paced. But Hale struck the blow? Holmes nodded. Grimshaw, loyal to the mistress he adored, staged the snow to implicate Thorne, whose rivalry was public. The attic mechanism was Hale's design. He is an engineer's son. Lady Hargrove provided the cord, the salt, the alibi of her garden walk. A red herring surfaced. We traced the missing emerald cufflink to a pawn shop in the Strand, pawned by Pritchard, Thorne's clerk, the morning of the murder. Thorne paid me to plant it in Hale's studio, Pritchard confessed under Lestrade's glare. Said it would muddy the waters. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Thorne is innocent of murder, guilty of opportunism. He hoped to acquire Hargrove's contracts cheaply amid the scandal. At 2:00 a.m., we stood outside Hale's studio. Snow had begun again, soft and relentless. The door was unlatched. A line of wet footprints led within. I cut him down, pulse already stilled. Holmes examined the knot, identical to the attic cord. Staged suicide. The true killer returns to tie loose ends. Holmes pried it free. Sir Reginald's blood. Hale kept it as a trophy, or a threat. He sniffed the corpse's lips. Almonds, prussic acid, poisoned first, then hanged. The killer is among us still. I stared, aghast. She murdered Hale to silence him? No, Holmes said grimly. She is in custody. These prints are fresh, within the hour. Someone else feared Hale's confession. Holmes pocketed it. The maid, Annie. She overheard everything, blackmailed Hale for silence. When he refused, she poisoned him, staged the suicide, and fled with the cufflink as insurance. We found her at King's Cross, ticket to Liverpool in hand. The cufflink was sewn into her petticoat, the poison vial still in her reticule. Back at 221B, dawn creeping gray, Holmes filled his pipe. Motive upon motive, Watson, jealousy, greed, fear, each a hidden blade. The snow concealed the first murder, silenced the second. The case cracked, yet one shadow lingered. The glove's twin, still missing. Chapter 6. The Forgotten Letter. Annie the maid had clung to innocence with the tenacity of a limpet. I never poisoned Mr. Hale. I pawned the cufflink, yes, blackmail money, but the glove ain't mine. Lestrade, ever eager for a tidy bow, had marched her off to the cells. Holmes, however, had dismissed the arrest with a wave. A pawn, Watson. The Queen remains on the board. Holmes tapped the sheet. Found in the Hargrove morning room grate. Grimshaw missed a fragment when he fed the fire. The hand is Lady Hargrove's, but the E is Hale's signature flourish, written the afternoon of the murder. Yet Hale did meet Sir Reginald at 10:30. Why the lie? I poured coffee, black and scalding. To cancel the meeting, then reschedule in person? Or to create a paper trail, Holmes said. Note the burn pattern, charred from the center outward. Someone held it to the flame, then snatched it back. Panic, not destruction. He produced a magnifying lens. Faint indentations beneath the text. Pressure from a second sheet laid atop. A carbon copy, perhaps. My pulse quickened. Instructions for the staging. Precisely. The original went to Hale. This copy was meant for Grimshaw, insurance. When Sir Reginald confronted Hale, the plan accelerated. Holmes folded the letter into an envelope. We must revisit the attic. The attic smelled of salt and despair. The broken window had been boarded, snow sifted through the cracks like flour. The salt bag lay where Pritchard had left it, drawstring torn. Holmes knelt, brushing dust from the floorboards. Holmes lifted the wire. Not for the salt, for the dagger. He demonstrated. Wire looped through the catar's ring, threaded up the chute, anchored to a nail above. A tug from the attic releases the blade mid-descent, stabs the victim from above, ingenious but unnecessary. Hale used his own hand. Visual, reenactment. Hale in the study, wire taut, dagger suspended like a guillotine. Sir Reginald looks up, too late, but the wire snaps. Hale lunges forward, finishes with the blade. I examined the linen bag. Inside, a folded letter, intact, sealed with violet wax, the same hand. My dearest E, if R will not yield, the snow must fall. Meet comprensione at 11. G. Grimshaw, I breathed. He wrote to Hale, not Lady Hargrove. Holmes's eyes gleamed. The butler orchestrated the mechanism, believing he acted for his mistress's honor. Hale, however, had his own agenda. He turned the seal. Beneath the wax, a pressed violet crushed flat. We descended to the study. The secret panel stood open. Lestrade's men had missed the deeper recess. Holmes pressed a knot in the wainscot. A click. A narrow drawer slid out, inside a miniature portrait. Lady Hargrove, eyes luminous, signed, "To my beloved R, forever E." On the reverse in pencil, "If he harms you, I end him." Holmes pocketed it. Hale's insurance. Should Sir Reginald expose the affair, this would ruin them both. But Sir Reginald found it first, hence the confrontation. Visual flashback, 10:30 p.m. Sir Reginald at his desk, portrait in hand. Hale enters, pleading. Sir Reginald tears the miniature, flings it. Hale snatches the guitar, stabs in rage. A red herring dissolved. The poison in the violet? Annie's doing. She had laced Hale's brandy earlier, hoping to silence him before he implicated her in the blackmail. Hale, already dying, hanged himself in despair, the ruby bead clenched as accusation. Holmes shook his head. Hale's death was suicide atop murder. Annie accelerated what guilt began. We returned to Baker Street at noon. Mrs. Hudson met us with telegrams. Thorne acquitted of conspiracy. Lady Hargrove charged with accessory. Yet Holmes paced, restless. "One thread remains," he said. "The gloves mate. Kid leather, Parisian, size 6. Lady Hargrove wears 7, Annie 5. Whose hand fits?" "Vickers," I said. "The club manager." Holmes smiled thinly. "Vickers visited Hale yesterday, delivered the final demand. Hale, poisoned and desperate, confessed the murder to buy time. Vickers silenced him, staged the suicide, left the glove as a blind." We confronted Vickers at the Gilded Ace. He crumbled beneath Holmes's gaze, the mate glove in his pocket, ruby beads sewn into the lining. "Debt," he whispered. Hargrove's note was worthless after death. Hale promised payment, then threatened exposure. I had no choice. Holmes lit his pipe. "Motive upon motive, Watson. Love, greed, fear. Each a forgotten letter in the fire. The snow has melted, but the ink remains. The case closed, yet the violet scent lingered." Chapter 7. Pursuit through the fog. Vickers had confessed to Hale's murder, but not to Sir Reginald's. I silenced the artist, yes, panic, not profit. The old man was already dead when I arrived. Lestrade, triumphant with one scalp, had bundled Vickers off to the yard. Holmes, however, stood at the window of 221B, pipe cold, eyes narrowed to slits. "Vickers is a pawn," Holmes said. "He arrived after Hale's suicide, staged the hanging to look like murder, and fled with the cufflink. But the first death, the guitar, the salt, the locked room, remains unclaimed. The footprints in Hale's studio were size 6, heeled, left foot heavier. Lady Hargrove is in custody. Annie wears 5s. Who remains?" I felt the chill. The gardener's wife, the cook. Holmes shook his head. "Think, Watson. Who had access to the attic, the study, the garden wall, and motive to silence Hale and Vickers?" He snatched his ulster. "The fog is our ally. Come." We took a growler to the Thames. The fog was a living thing, coiling around bridges, muffling the lap of black water. Holmes led me to a wharf below Blackfriars, where a lighter lay half-loaded with saffron crates. Thorne's consignment bound for Rotterdam at dawn. Holmes crouched behind a bollard. "Mrs. Langley, the cook. Size 6, left foot weakened by gout. She baked Sir Reginald's favorite seed cake daily. She knew the attic stores, the chute, the salt, and she loved Grimshaw." I stared. The butler and the cook? Unrequited on his side, reciprocated on hers. When Grimshaw leapt, she believed Hale had driven him to it. She poisoned Hale, framed Vickers, and now flees with Thorne's gold. Payment for silence. Holmes signaled. We crept aboard. The deck was slick with ice. Crates towered like monoliths. Thorne's voice drifted. "The saffron's yours, Mrs. Langley. 500 sovereigns, you'll vanish in Rotterdam. New name, new life." Holmes stepped from the shadows. "A new life built on old blood, madam?" I grappled with Thorne. His scar split under my fist. Holmes disarmed Mrs. Langley with a judo throw, the guitar clattering into the Thames. She fought like a tigress, nails raking his cheek. "You killed him," she screamed. "Hale drove my Grimshaw to his death." Holmes pinned her wrists. Grimshaw staged the snow to protect Lady Hargrove. Hale struck the blow in self-defense. "You poisoned Hale for vengeance, framed Vickers for profit, and now flee with Thorne's bribe." Mrs. Langley spat. Reginald mocked Grimshaw's devotion. Hale seduced the mistress. I baked the seed cake with rat poison. Reginald refused it, so I waited. The salt was my idea. Grimshaw's hands, my heart. Police whistles pierced the fog. Lestrade's men swarmed the lighter, summoned by Holmes's earlier telegram. Mrs. Langley was cuffed. Thorne protested innocence. The guitar sank unseen, rubies winking out like dying stars. Back at 221B, sunlight struggled through the grime. Holmes laid the locket beside the ruby bead. Motive. Love turned to acid. Mrs. Langley rigged the shoot with Grimshaw, but Hale arrived early, argued, stabbed. Grimshaw, believing he had failed, leapt. Mrs. Langley, deranged by loss, poisoned Hale, framed Vickers, and bargained with Thorne for escape. I poured whiskey. And the seed cake? Refused by Sir Reginald, his last mercy. Mrs. Langley's final act was to bake it for Hale, laced with prussic acid. He drank tea instead. Holmes raised his glass. To the forgotten, Grimshaw, who loved too well. Mrs. Langley, who loved too late. The pursuit ended, but the fog lingered in our hearts. Chapter 8. The Alibi Unravels. Lestrade opened his notebook with a flourish. "Mrs. Langley, you've confessed to poisoning Hale and attempting flight. Sir Reginald's murder, you're doing as well?" "I rigged the salt," she said, voice flat. "Grimshaw pulled the cord, but the blade was Hale's hand. I never meant murder, only disgrace." Holmes stepped forward. "Disgrace requires a living victim. Sir Reginald died at 10:37 p.m. We have the stopwatch. The salt fell at 11:15 per Pritchard's timing. Explain the gap." Mrs. Langley's lips trembled. Grimshaw panicked. Hale stabbed, then fled through the garden. Grimshaw bolted the door, released the salt to cover the blood. "I was in the kitchen baking tomorrow's bread." Lestrade snorted. "Convenient. And Hale's alibi?" Holmes produced a cabman's log. Hale left his studio at 10:20, arrived Mayfair 10:29, departed 10:41, cabman's testimony corroborated by a constable on the beat. He returned home by 11:05, poisoned by you at 11:30, tight but possible. I felt the net tighten, yet Holmes's eyes gleamed with dissatisfaction. The guitar was returned to the mantel after the salt fell, ruby bead loose in the hilt. Who replaced it? Mrs. Langley paled. Grimshaw, he was meticulous. Grimshaw leapt at 12:15, Holmes countered. The guitar was photographed in place at 7 a.m. Someone else returned it. Lestrade scratched his head. The gardener? Holmes shook his head. Footprints. Size 6, left heavy. Mrs. Langley's, but the attic cord was cut, not untied, knife marks fresh. She was below, baking. We adjourned to the Hargrove mansion. The study had been sealed, wax seals cracked like eggshells as Holmes entered. He knelt by the hearth, lens poised. "Thorne's cargo," he murmured. "Mrs. Langley carried it from the lighter, but here," he indicated the carpet. A depression circular 3 inches wide, a tin of saffron placed to weight the salt bag, then removed. Mrs. Langley, brought from the yard, stared. "I never—" Holmes produced the kitchen ledger. "You signed for 3 tins of saffron yesterday, hun, for curry. 1 tin missing. You weighted the bag, released the salt, then retrieved the tin to plant on the lighter, implicating Thorne." Lestrade beamed. "Motive, vengeance for Grimshaw, profit from Thorne." Holmes's voice cut like ice. Prophet requires a living accomplice. Thorne's alibi, 50 witnesses at Mincing Lane. Mrs. Langley's kitchen alone. The tin was planted after her arrest. I saw it then. The constable on the beat, 1041, he saw Hale running, but who was with him? Holmes produced the constable's revised statement. A woman, small, cloaked, left foot dragging. He assumed a maid, but the cloak was sable, Lady Hargrove's, stolen from the hall stand. Lady Hargrove, summoned from her cell, entered pale but composed. I lent my cloak to Mrs. Langley. She was cold in the kitchen. Holmes laid the stopped watch before her. Your husband's watch, stopped by the blade's impact. The crystal is cracked inward, the catar struck from above. Impossible for Hale, who is shorter. You stood on the desk, stabbed downward as he bent to retrieve the portrait. Lady Hargrove's composure shattered. He was destroying us. Edmund, me, the house. I took the catar Tuesday, hid it in the secret drawer. Edmund came to plead. Reginald attacked him. I struck to save my love. Holmes continued. You bolted the door, released the salt via the chute. Grimshaw's mechanism, but your hand on the cord. Mrs. Langley below heard the struggle, assumed Hale's guilt. She poisoned him to protect you, framed Vickers, planted the tin. You let her take the blame. Mrs. Langley wept. I thought she was innocent. Lestrade cuffed Lady Hargrove. Accessory after the fact, Mrs. Langley. Murder, your ladyship. Holmes pocketed the bead. The alibi unravels like the cord, thread by thread. Lady Hargrove killed for love, Mrs. Langley for loyalty. The snow concealed both. The case was closed, but the hearth at 221B felt colder. Chapter 9. The final clue. I had been summoned by Lestrade's runner. Urgent, Hargrove study, new evidence. Holmes, however, had refused to stir until the post arrived. The telegram was from the yard's photographer. Plate developed. Anomaly in mantle reflection. Come at once. We reached the mansion as the milk carts clattered past. The study door stood open. Lestrade hovered like a proud ferret. On the table lay an enlarged photograph, taken at 7:15 a.m. the morning of discovery. The chalk outline, the salt, the catar on the mantel. But in the polished brass fender, a reflection. A woman's hand, gloveless, reaching to adjust the dagger. The sleeve, black bombazine, jet bead missing. Holmes's lens hovered. Lady Hargrove's mourning gown. The bead matches the one in Grimshaw's locket, sewn by Mrs. Langley as a love token. She was in the room after the salt fell, before the police arrived. Lestrade stammered, but her ladyship was in her bedroom. With a perfect view of the garden, Holmes finished. She watched Mrs. Langley stage the scene, then descended to discover the body with the maids. The confession was partial insurance. We ascended to the attic. The broken window had been replaced, the salt bag removed. Yet Holmes knelt by the chute, fingers tracing the floorboards. A faint scratch, 3 parallel lines. I stared. The Hargrove boy, Reginald Jr. He's 8. Holmes's face was grim. Sent to his aunt in Surrey the day after the murder. Mrs. Langley's nephew by marriage. She used him to test the chute. Lowered a toy soldier with string. The slate was her signal board. Downstairs, the secret panel yielded one last secret. Holmes pressed the wainscot. A second drawer slid out. Inside, a child's mitten, salt-stained, and a folded note in Mrs. Langley's hand. If the snow falls wrong, pull the red cord. Auntie M. Holmes's voice was soft thunder. The boy was the fail-safe. If Hale failed to stab, the weighted catar would drop. Mrs. Langley planned murder from the start. Lady Hargrove merely provided the motive. We confronted Lady Hargrove in her cell. The photograph lay between us like an accusation. She crumpled. I never meant the boy to see, she whispered. Mrs. Langley said the salt was a game, snow for Papa's surprise. When Reginald attacked Edmund, I struck to save my lover. Mrs. Langley took the blame to protect the child and me. Holmes was merciless. You used a child as a murder weapon's trigger. The slate proves intent. Lestrade arrived with the aunt's statement. Young Reginald had woken screaming the night of the murder, babbling about snow falling on Papa. The boy was en route to London under police escort. Back at 221B, Holmes laid the final pieces. The stopped watch, crystal cracked by the Qatar's ring, not the blade. The ring had been loosened by Mrs. Langley days earlier, to plant the ruby bead as evidence. The child's mitten, left in the attic to silence him if he spoke. Holmes filled his pipe. The final clue was the reflection, Mrs. Langley's hand adjusting the scene. The child's slate was the signature. Love, loyalty, and a boy's innocence. Twisted into a noose. I poured whiskey. And the boy? We'll testify. Mrs. Langley to transportation, Lady Hargrove to the gallows. The slate seals it. The final clue had spoken. The snow was gone, but the stain remained. Chapter 10. The Revelation at Baker Street. Holmes began without preamble. The snow has melted, the fog lifted, the alibis unraveled. One truth remains. Let us rehearse the chain, link by link, that none may doubt the verdict. Link 1. Motive. Sir Reginald discovered his wife's affair with Edmund Hale and her embezzlement of $8,000 to cover Hale's debts. Exposure meant ruin. Murder became salvation. Link 2. The weapon. Lady Hargrove removed the Qatar Tuesday, hid it in the secret drawer. She intended to threaten, not kill, until Hale arrived at 10:29 pleading. Sir Reginald attacked Hale with a paper knife. Lady Hargrove stabbed downward from the desk. Watch stopped at 10:37. Holmes lifted the stopped watch. Link 3. The locked room. Hale bolted the door behind him. Habit of privacy. Lady Hargrove, trapped with the corpse, signaled Mrs. Langley via the speaking tube disguised as a bell pull. Link 4. The snow. Mrs. Langley had prepared the salt bag weeks earlier, weighted with a saffron tin. Young Reginald, believing it a game, had tested the chute with his toy soldier. At 11:15, the bag fell, covering the blood. Mrs. Langley descended, adjusted the Qatar on the mantel, her hand captured in the fender's reflection, then planted the ruby bead to implicate Hale. Holmes laid the slate beside the mitten. Link 5. The child. Mrs. Langley used her nephew as courier and trigger. The mitten, salt-stained, was left to silence him if he spoke. The slate was her signal board, hidden beneath the attic floorboards. Link 6. The aftermath. Lady Hargrove discovered the body at 7 a.m., feigning shock. Mrs. Langley baked seed cake laced with rat poison. Refused by Sir Reginald, later fed to Hale in tea, accelerated by prussic acid when he hesitated. Holmes turned to Mrs. Langley. You poisoned Hale to protect the boy and Lady Hargrove. You framed Vickers with the cufflink, planted the saffron tin on Thorne's lighter, and bargained for escape. Loyalty, madam, became your noose. Lady Hargrove's voice was a thread. I struck the blow. The rest was panic. Spare the boy. He saw nothing. Holmes's eyes softened a fraction. Link 7. The law. Lady Hargrove. Murder. Mrs. Langley. Accessory, poisoning, perversion of justice. Young Reginald, witness, not accomplice. The slate and photograph seal it. Holmes raised a hand. One final demonstration. He placed the toy soldier on the table, tied a silk thread to its base, and looped the thread through the gaselier. A gentle tug. The soldier slid across the velvet, stopping precisely over the ruby bead. Thus the salt bag fell, Holmes said. Thus the Qatar was meant to fall had Lady Hargrove hesitated. The child's game became the mechanism of death. Silence. Then Mrs. Hudson's sob broke it. Young Reginald ran to Mrs. Langley, burying his face in her apron. "Auntie, don't go." Lestrade cleared his throat. "The boy will be placed with his aunt in Surrey, under supervision, no charges." The door closed. The room exhaled. I raised my glass. "To justice." Holmes's voice was soft. "To innocence corrupted. The snow fell to hide a crime, but truth like frost clings to every surface." Holmes lifted the bead, placed it in young Reginald's hand as he slept. "Let him keep this, a reminder that even the smallest hand can move the world." And so the case of the snow-covered murder ended, not with a bang, but with a child's whisper in the hush of falling white.